Hey guys, today I'm talking about new car break-in as well as engine break-in. So these two topics, they're overlapping. And as I'm doing this, I'm driving my 2021 Subaru WRX. And I'm first gonna go over the two main schools of thought regarding engine break-in and new car break-in. And I'm gonna tell you the reasoning behind them. And later on, I'll give you my own personal thoughts on the best way to break in a new car and or a new engine. So starting with what the manufacturers say. So the specific variations are not so important, but all manufacturers pretty much say that while the car is new or the engine is new, you want to avoid quote unquote racing the engine. You want to avoid putting the engine under a full load. And you'll also want to avoid exceeding an arbitrary RPM limit for the first 1,000 miles or so. Specifically on the Subaru WRX, as you can see, this one, it's got 180,000 miles, so I'm doing the break-in now. Subaru says to not exceed 4,000 RPM during the first 1,000 miles, unless in cases of emergency. Now, manufacturers of trucks or other vehicles that do towing, they will also tell you, in addition to not exceeding a certain RPM, they will tell you to not tow anything for the first 1,000 miles or so. And even beyond that, when you first tow something, they will tell you to pull over after the first 10 or 15 minutes and allow for the differential to cool down. Now, the reason why all these manufacturers have the same general recommendations, the idea behind that is to avoid excessive wear on the bearing surfaces and the basically the surfaces on the bearings that rub up against one another. And it also helps with the gears. So the differential, all the gears that mesh together, as well as in the transmission. Now the idea is that the bearings and the gears being so new, they might have sharp edges and they might not fit together as well when they're brand new. So you want to avoid putting a lot of power through them until the surfaces have worn together. So that's the general philosophy behind the manufacturer recommendations regarding break-in. Now, another popular school of thought regarding engine break-in is what I can call the engine builder mindset. And generally speaking, this mindset is that you have to race the engine, you have to put the engine under a heavy load for a prolonged period of time. You want to keep the RPMs high. And the school of thought behind this is that only by doing these things can you increase the cylinder pressures high enough to allow for the piston rings to seat properly against the cylinder walls. And proponents of the what I call the engine breaker school of thought, they'll tell you that unless you do those things on your new engine or your new car, you'll end up with an engine that is burning excessive oil or has excessive blow-by due to the piston rings not seating properly. So those are the two main schools of thought. Now I'm going to give my input on what I think about new car and new engine breaking in, and I'm going to try to keep it brief because I can go on and on about the subject pretty much all day. But I'll tell you that I lean more towards the manufacturer school of thought, and I'll tell you why. For one, if the engine builders, if their methodology was correct, then we would see a lot more cars on the road that are burning oil. Because I can tell you right now, most people that buy new cars, they're not running them balls to the wall, they're not hitting the rev limiter, they're not putting them under a heavy load. And as it stands, most people are buying new cars and they're just driving them normally. So I think there is something to the manufacturer recommendations. I think cylinder pressures get high enough without racing the engine or putting it under a full load. Even at 4,000 RPM, you can see my car has reached over 9 pounds of boost from me driving it in this manner. So even with me keeping the RPMs down, I'm still hitting a lot of boost, and my cylinder pressures, they're going to be high. They might not be as high as if I was redlining the car doing wide open throttle up a hill. But I'm confident that my piston rings are not going to have any issues that they wouldn't otherwise have. Things that I do specifically when I'm braking in a car or a motor, I avoid idling. So once I get the vehicle running, I'm driving it. I'm not letting it idle. I'm not letting it warm up. I'm avoiding sitting at a red light. And in the case that I do have to sit at a red light for a long period of time, I'll turn off my air conditioning if I have it on. This will reduce the load on the engine while it's at idle. So that's one thing I do. I also avoid taking a lot of short trips. What I want to do is I want to start the car, start driving it. I want the coolant temperature to get up there so that the motor reaches what's called closed loop. So closed loop is something that fuel injected engines do once they're reaching their operating temperature. So under closed loop, that's when the stoichiometric ratio is closer to the 14.7 that we all learned in the textbook. During open loop, when the engine's warming up, your engine is going to be running a bit richer. And so if you keep doing short trips, not allowing the engine to reach closed loop, then you're basically running the engine in a rich state for a long period of time. This can lead to fuel dilution, an engine running rich. It can also inhibit the oil coating on the cylinder walls, which will allow for the proper piston ring fitment. So yeah, I want it to go into closed loop and stay there. Running it for a longer period of time will also allow the oil to reach its operating temperature. And this is something that takes longer than the coolant. The coolant will get to its operating temperature much sooner than the oil will. So yeah, run the engine, run the car for a while. I don't do the short trips. And one thing that I have taken from the engine builder philosophy is, without exceeding the RPM limit, I will allow the engine revs to hang out high. I will allow the car to engine brake whenever possible. So sometimes when I do wish to decelerate, I'll shift it into a higher gear to allow that engine braking action to occur. And I believe that this is beneficial for the piston rings. One other thing that I do, and this is something I do in general, whether I'm braking in a motor or not, is I avoid lugging the engine. So lugging the engine is basically what you can call having the RPM of the motor too low while you're putting a load on the engine. So if I need some power, I'll downshift. I don't want my engine to be revving at 1800 RPM when I'm trying to accelerate, especially if I'm going up a hill. So I try to keep the RPMs higher. Another thing I do when driving, when braking in a new car or a new engine, is I will not use the cruise control. So I want the speed of the engine to constantly vary, provided I don't exceed the manufacturer recommended RPM limit. So I don't allow the car to just, be sitting in fifth gear at, 2800 RPM for minutes and minutes. So I want to always be switching to different gears. I'm varying the load, I'm varying the RPM. And the idea behind this is you want to vary the harmonics of the engine. When the engine is when the engine is spinning at a certain RPM, there's a harmonic associated with that. And if you allow the engine to hang out at the same RPM and the same load for a long period of time, the theory is you're hanging out in that specific harmonic for too long and you're inhibiting the proper bearing wear in. So as you may have guessed, there's a lot of juju to this. This is a topic that people have been arguing about pretty much as long as engines have been around. And I suspect that the science will never be settled. Pretty much anyone you speak to will have a different opinion on engine break-in, and it's a bit like oil. Everyone has different thoughts on what kind of oils to use. But I just thought I'd share my thoughts on the new car and the new engine break-in. And I'm interested to hear about what you guys have to say. What your thoughts are regarding new engines, new cars, how they should be properly broken in. One thing I will share with you as well, for a long period of time, there was sort of, I'll call it lore. So the lore was that conventional oils were better for break-in as compared to synthetic oils, because the conventional oils allow for more friction, which can be beneficial for the piston rings and the bearing surfaces. So that used to be lore. People are kind of moving away from that now. Pretty much any new car you buy is gonna come out of the box with fully synthetic fluid. And so if full synthetic fluid was so detrimental for the break-in process, I'm pretty sure manufacturers would be shipping their cars with conventional oil, with the advice to change that oil after the first 1,000 miles or so. There are many other myths regarding engine break-in. Don't really have time to go over all of the ones that I've heard, but I'd like to hear about it in the discussions below. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching. I want to hear about any differing opinions that you guys have. Always open to new ideas. And of course, you know, with this car I'm driving right now being new, if it develops a problem burning oil after I've done the manufacturer recommended break-in, I'll definitely share that with you guys. You know, I want to put good information out there that's accurate. So yeah, thanks for watching.